They said the water turned red before the Marines even reached the shore. It wasn't a poetic turn of phrase. It wasn't a metaphor. It was blood. Real, thick, human blood, mingling with the tide off Batio Island. And that tide was pulling dead men backwards into the lagoon like a cruel undertow. It painted the waves in deep streaks of crimson, stained uniforms, and churned in slow spirals as boots broke the surface. Some floated face down, some didn't float at all. Their helmets bobbed, drifted, vanished. And the men still alive, the ones crouched in the back of bobbing Higgins boats or climbing down rope ladders into Amtraks, saw it and didn't say a word. A silence gripped them, not fear, not shock, but a primal understanding that what was ahead would chew through their numbers. Not because they weren't afraid, not because they didn't feel it in their guts, but because screaming took energy, and energy meant survival. Screaming was for people who had time to feel things. Here, breathing took priority. War correspondent Robert Sherrod was with them. Not behind the lines, not on a ship far from the action, with them. Cramped beside 18-year-olds who couldn't stop shaking, clutching a notepad, a sidearm, and the silent prayer that the Type 96 guns didn't find him before he found a story worth dying for. His fingers trembled. From adrenaline or nausea, he wasn't sure, but he kept writing. Not facts, not strategy, details, sweat lines, muddy boots, blank stares. I watched the island come into view like a splinter, Sherrod would write later. A grey tooth in the ocean, flat, sun-baked, and bristling with steel. The image burned into him. This wasn't an island. It was a trap. Tarawa was supposed to take 1 day. 3 hours, some had said. That was the whisper passed among young Marines the night before. Easy, quick, like peeling a coconut. Instead, it would become the most violent 76 hours in Marine Corps history. And every hour began here, in the rising silence of young men realizing their war movie ideas were gone. Burned away by the stench of oil, cordite, salt, and the unmistakable copper tang of blood. The lull before contact, a breathing space in hell. "Keep your heads down," someone shouted from the front of the boat, but they already were. Ahead lay Batio, a 2-mile island fortified by nearly 5,000 Japanese troops, with 1,000 pillboxes, trenches, bunkers, and a commanding officer who said it would take 1,000,000 men 100 years to take it. He wasn't joking. The island bristled with defenses, hidden guns, mortar pits, fields of fire crisscrossed like fishing nets. The Marines sent 18,000, and they gave them 3 days. Sherrod glanced to his left. A kid, maybe 19, maybe younger, gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles were white. His lips moved, repeating something under his breath, the same phrase, over and over. Almost like a whisper into a confessional. "What's that?" Sherrod asked. The Marine didn't look up. "Psalm 23, sir. My mom made me memorize it." Sherrod nodded. He didn't say he wasn't religious. He didn't say anything. He just kept writing. The boy's voice cracked on, "I shall fear no evil." The bombardment started at dawn. It was hell's overture. Battleships fired from offshore, their guns screaming across the sky and slamming into the island like gods throwing tantrums. Aircraft dropped bombs in screaming arcs. Machine guns rattled from landing craft. The ocean seemed to boil with steel. From the sea, the island looked like it was being devoured by flame. Smoke columns rose like funeral pyres. The sky darkened, not from clouds, but from what they were doing to the earth. But Sherrod noticed something. The flame didn't move. The bunkers didn't fall. And as they came closer, the island began to spit back. The fire wasn't just surviving, it was waiting. Tracer rounds stitched the water. Mortar shells plumed geysers around the Amtraks. The surf boiled with gunfire. Sherrod's boat lurched, and a Marine to his right vomited through clenched teeth wiping it with a sleeve like it didn't matter. "Too shallow," someone yelled. The coral reef, miscalculated, stopped the landing craft. Sherrod's stomach dropped. They were stuck, 100 yards out, right in the open. "Go over!" a sergeant shouted. "Get over! Go, go, go!" Men leapt into the surf. Some screamed as bullets tore into the water around them. Others just ran. Sherrod followed, notebook jammed in his pocket, water up to his chest. His legs burned, his breath shortened. Each step took seconds. It was hot, unnaturally hot. The Pacific sun blistered down, the water clung like syrup. Bodies floated past him, men he'd shared a cigarette with 20 minutes earlier, faces slack, hands open. One stared at him with open eyes. The screaming wasn't loud. That's what surprised him. It was quiet. Men groaned, some shouted for corpsmen, but mostly there was breathing. Heavy, strained, animal breathing. The sound of men fighting water, sand and bullets with every ounce of life they had. It wasn't panic, it was survival in its rawest form. Sherrod reached the seawall, barely 5 feet of broken timber and sand. He collapsed behind it next to 3 other Marines. His chest heaved. The sand tasted like ash. One had no helmet, one had no rifle, one had no left hand. He wrote nothing, just stared. Their eyes met, silent acknowledgement that nothing they had trained for covered this. Day 1, he would write later, wasn't a battle, it was a massacre that forgot to end. And the ocean, indifferent as ever, pulled at the wounded as it had the dead. By noon, dozens of Amtraks were burning. The beach was littered with bodies, Marines, Japanese, no one knew. The seawall held survivors like driftwood. They clung, dug in, and waited. Some prayed, some cursed. Most just waited. Sherrod crawled from body to body, asking names, ranks, anything. Some gave him stories, most gave him blank stares. One Marine asked for a cigarette. Sherrod didn't smoke, but he gave him one anyway. "Didn't think I'd die in water," one Marine muttered. "You're not gonna," Sherrod told him, but the kid already wasn't listening. His hand was open, palm up, as if asking the ocean for something it would never return. As night fell, the tide crept in. It tugged the dead back into the surf, pulled their boots, unwrapped bandages, undid everything the living had tried to preserve. The water turned red again, and no one slept. The night didn't fall so much as it sank, heavy and soaked with the stench of death. Marines clung to the shattered seawall like shipwrecked men, pressed into the sand, too exhausted to move, too alert to sleep. Overhead, Japanese machine guns barked intermittently, sweeping the beach in bursts that had no pattern. There was no safe time, just quieter seconds. Robert Sherrod had found a shallow scrape behind a burnt-out Amtrak. Its hull still radiated heat. Every now and then, a soft pop from inside signaled another shell or grenade cooking off. He flinched each time, but stayed. He didn't write that night. There was nothing to add. The page from earlier was smeared with blood and salt water. He stared at it for an hour, rereading the same sentence. "The beach is red, and the air smells like rust." Somewhere in the darkness, a Marine whispered a prayer. Another muttered in his sleep. Near dawn, a scream rang out, sharp, brief, then silence again. Sherrod didn't know if it came from a dream or someone dragged off by the tide. At first light, he forced himself to move. His legs had stiffened. He tried to stand and almost collapsed. A Marine nearby offered a hand. "You Sherrod?" the kid asked, helping him up. "That obvious? Seen your face in time. Didn't think you'd be here." "Didn't think I'd be here either," the kid smirked. "Name's Leeds, 3rd Battalion. They dropped us right into hell yesterday." They shared a sip from a battered canteen and watched the beach smoke. As the sun rose, officers barked orders. Marines began crawling forward in short bursts. Fire teams advanced trench by trench, shell hole by shell hole. The Japanese still held the airfield and much of the interior. Every 50 yards, a new pillbox or spider hole erupted with fire. Sherrod moved with Leeds' squad. He kept low, his camera slung over one shoulder, his notepad jammed into his flak vest. The ground was soft, torn coral and sand, soaked through with blood. The Marines' boots squished as they stepped. Sherrod found himself constantly ducking behind wreckage, broken trees, dead men, the twisted frames of LVTs, anything to avoid the unseen eyes that hunted them. Sniper fire cracked over their heads. Somewhere beyond the ruined airstrip, a .30 caliber raked the beach. 2 men ahead of Sherrod fell. One flopped like a rag, the other went rigid. "Get that pillbox!" a sergeant shouted. Leeds and 2 others darted left, tossed grenades. Sherrod held his breath. The explosions thudded like punches to the chest. A second later, Leeds yelled, "Clear!" They moved in. Inside the pillbox, the floor was slick. 2 Japanese gunners lay twisted near the gun slit. One had his hands still gripping the trigger. Leeds stepped over him, kicked the weapon aside. "They don't surrender," he said flatly. Sherrod nodded. He crouched and scribbled. The day ground on. Every 20 yards brought new resistance. Marines dropped satchel charges into ventilation holes, flushed out tunnels with flamethrowers. The smell became unbearable, a mix of diesel, scorched wood, rotting meat, and something worse. Sherrod saw things he would never write about. A Marine shot point blank in the chest, a flamethrower igniting an entire trench, the screams that followed. A Japanese soldier pretending to surrender, only to detonate a grenade as he was approached. The blast threw Sherrod off his feet. Leeds pulled him up. "You good?" He wasn't, but he nodded. By afternoon, they'd advanced nearly 100 yards. Sherrod found cover behind a collapsed coconut log barrier. Leeds joined him, unwrapping a chocolate bar. "Want half?" "God, yes." They ate in silence. "You married?" Leeds asked. "No." "Good. Don't. You come back from this, you'll never sleep right again." Sherrod almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was probably true. A radio nearby crackled. The next phase was coming. The 6th Marines were landing on the western shore. A final push was being organized to clear the central strongpoint. It would be brutal. As dusk fell, the sky turned a sickly yellow. Smoke blurred the horizon. Sherrod watched as a group of Marines crawled across the open airstrip, a killing field. Half didn't make it. The rest lay in shallow depressions, pinned. Leeds was part of the flanking team, ordered to punch through from the south. Sherrod followed at a distance, using bomb craters as cover. He saw Leeds signal to his men, a sharp forward motion, then toss a grenade. The blast tore into a bunker wall. Marines rushed in. Gunfire erupted. Screams followed. Sherrod waited, counted. 30 seconds. Then a shout. "It's clear!" He moved forward. Inside, the bunker was chaos, blood everywhere. Leeds stood over a fallen Marine, eyes wide. "God damn," he whispered. The Marine was missing half his face. Another lay curled against the wall, clutching his stomach. Sherrod knelt, pulled out his notebook, then stopped. What could he write? What line could make sense of this? Outside, night fell again. That night, Sherrod stayed near the bunker. The wounded were carried out. Corpsmen whispered reassurances they didn't believe. Leeds sat next to Sherrod, staring into nothing. "How many more days, you think?" he asked. Sherrod didn't answer. From the darkness, a sudden volley. A Japanese soldier charged, screaming into the perimeter, blade raised. A Marine fired. The man crumpled feet from Sherrod. No one spoke for a long time. When dawn came, the American flag was visible over the airfield ruins. The central bunker was smoking. They had a foothold, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was exhaustion. The kind that settles in bones. Sherrod closed his notebook. The worst wasn't over. But something had shifted. They weren't dying to take the beach anymore. Now they were dying to finish it. Dawn broke grey on the 3rd day. Smoke hung low over the island like a shroud, trapped in the still air. There was no sunrise, just a dull light that peeled back the edges of night and revealed more wreckage, more ruin, more men lying where they'd fallen. Robert Sherrod sat beside what had once been a seawall and now looked more like a burial mound. He sipped water from a dented canteen that tasted of rust and someone else's blood. A fly buzzed near his ear. He didn't flinch. A dead Marine lay half buried in the sand nearby, his arm reaching out as if trying to grab something that had long since disappeared. Sherrod wrote, "The men are not cheering. There is no flag waving, only silence, and the clatter of empty ammo cans being kicked aside." The third day wasn't a fight. It was a clearing, a purge. The remaining Japanese defenders, what few hadn't already been killed in the trenches or burned out of bunkers, launched desperate suicidal charges in the night. Some came with bayonets fixed, others with grenades clenched in both hands. A few wore nothing at all, faces painted white, eyes wide. Ghosts charging from the jungle. "They came out screaming," one Marine said. "Didn't matter if they were shot. They just wanted to take someone with them." Sherrod saw the aftermath. Piles of bodies near the command post. The torn flag of the rising sun tangled in a coconut tree. And Marines sitting beside it, rifles slack in their hands, staring into the branches like they were waiting for the tree to say something. A lieutenant pointed to the map in the dirt. "We've got 2 strong points left. One's a cave network near the airstrip. The other's a bunker near the pier." The men didn't react. Orders were orders. They stood, adjusted their packs, and walked. Leeds was still alive. His face was smudged with soot. His uniform was half gone. He looked 20 years older than when Sherrod met him. "You writing about all this?" Leeds asked. "I am." "Then make it count." They moved toward the caves together. Marines crept from crater to crater, flamethrowers and satchel charges in hand. The Japanese didn't fire back at first. Then a scream, high, sharp, broke the silence. A shot cracked, then another. "Go!" someone shouted. Sherrod hit the ground, crawled forward behind a log. He could smell the powder before he could see the flashes. A flamethrower hissed. The cave's entrance lit up like a furnace. Then came the silence again. One Marine backed out, fell to his knees, and vomited. Leeds followed, pale, shaking. "It's done," he said. The bunker near the pier fell hours later. A Sherman tank rumbled over coral and debris, its treads clanking like bones. It fired point-blank into the opening. The blast knocked birds from the sky. After that, it was over. But it didn't feel like victory. Sherrod walked the length of the island that afternoon. Baishio was 2 miles long. He counted over 400 bodies in that first mile alone. Marines lay where they'd fallen, some with helmets still on, some without heads at all. Japanese corpses were everywhere. Some clutched rifles. Some had blown themselves up. Others had simply curled into balls and waited to die. The smell was unbearable. Sweet, rancid. A rot that got into your clothes, your skin, your teeth. Sherrod saw a pair of boots standing upright with no legs in them. A helmet filled with seawater. A hand severed, still gripping a knife. He didn't write any of that. Instead, he wrote, "Tarawa is quiet now, too quiet, as if the island itself is holding its breath." A chaplain read last rites over a group of Marines laid out in rows. Someone had found an American flag and draped it over 3 of the bodies. Others were covered in ponchos or nothing at all. Leeds sat beside a fallen friend, didn't speak, just sat. "I thought I'd feel proud," he finally said, "but I don't. I feel tired." Sherrod nodded. "You're allowed to feel both." He filed his report that evening. Tarawa has been taken, but not won. The price was too high to be called a victory, too bloody to be called strategy. It was a necessary horror, and the men who survived it will carry it with them longer than they carry their rifles. Back aboard ship, days later, Sherrod looked back at the island from the deck. Baishio was a smear on the horizon. Smoke still rose in places. The sea was calm again. The war would move on. To the Marshalls, to Saipan, to Iwo. But Tarawa would stay, not just on the map, not just in the reports, but in the faces of the men who had stepped into the red surf and come out different. Sherrod closed his notebook. He would never forget the silence.